Bonnie is probably different from most of you in knowing Thai well, and I gather she not only knows Thai into English, but English into Thai, and that kind of thing impresses and stuns me very much. But she's really a Thai person now. She lives there more than in Ann Arbor. She was in Ann Arbor 12 years ago.
I think I moved around then, 12, 15, just before the tsunami.
She doesn't know I'm deaf, obviously. But she knows when she was here, apparently. So anyway, she's written this very charming book. I say that because she gave me a copy.
Here it is.
The one on your list here. It's the Buddhist Murals of Northeast Thailand. Yeah, and it's really charming and really delightful. And there's folk art that really sings, it seems to me. So, and then a much more, I suppose, boring would be her dissertation. Right?
You're right. They are boring.
Pramalai, who of course is a very, very major figure, and I'm going to let her tell you more about him. So she's carrying the Southeast Asian flag for you all so nicely, and so I welcome her back for all of us so much, and really she's a great person.
Thank you, Walter. Walter made my life here so much nicer than it would have been without him. Went to India a few times with him. And Judith Becker is the first person I met after we moved to Ann Arbor and went for a walk in the neighborhood and ran into her and Pete walking around Newport Road. So it's good to have some John Whitmore. Oh, Susan, thank you all for coming. So thank you for Christiane for inviting me, and Allison for all the work you've done in making this happen. And thanks to the Center for giving me an education that I really appreciate. So we're going to start with, now I've never done, I feel like I'm a pilot. I've got a lot of controls here, and I haven't used them before. So let's begin, and we'll see how it goes. We should have music, and I've tried to get some music inserted, but I'm not good at that yet. Next time. So this is a mural. It's a detail of a procession, and there are a lot of processions in Thai Buddhism. People are always walking to the temple for different occasions, but in a great festive manner. Yes? I don't want slideshow, I want...
Well, it doesn't. Doesn't someone know how to put this in the right format so it fills the full screen and doesn't have the notes?
I want, oh yeah, I want, oh, yeah.
On display.
Yeah.
Right here.
Okay, that's better, much better than, you shouldn't see what I see, right? I just learned you could put the notes on, and I've been struggling for years how to do this. Okay, yeah, they're in procession, and Buddhist ceremonies are really celebrations. A lot of what goes on is the celebrating of giving gifts, giving donations to the temple, because when you do that, you know you will eventually get something better in return, a better life in the next life, or something better here. And so people really are very joyful when they do this. They have a lot of fun. They celebrate. Sometimes they drink while in their procession too, and they dance. And so here's this joy that you see in these men playing the musical instruments. Let's try this one, the can. Have you ever heard the can? No, it sounds a little like a bagpipe. And notice that they have tattoos to make them look more handsome and to show that they have the strength to put up with pain. So they're all decked out in this procession. And the procession is part of the Vasantra Jataka story, where Vasantra is the future Buddha. He has so generous, he has given away everything, including the kingdom's elephant, the auspicious white elephant. Because of that, the kingdom is doomed to have a drought. The king kicks him out, so he goes to the jungle with his wife and kids, and then runs into all kinds of things that happen there. Eventually, he keeps giving things away. He gives away his kids, he gives away his wife, but not really, because he gives them to somebody who's like a deity in disguise. And he gets them all back because he's done all this. He's perfected this value of donation or generosity. So then he's welcomed back to the city in a great procession with a lot of dancing and music. And in the Northeast, this is acted out. In every temple, especially in the villages, every year, they have a great big festival with this going on. And a great big scroll that has the chapters of the story on the scroll. So this is from a mural that looks like the scroll. So you can just read this. It's much of what I said in my abstract, my publicity piece, that Thailand is famous for its Bangkok temples and the murals in these temples, and also for those in some in the north. But I don't think many people, even in Thailand, even in Isan, the northeast, know about these murals because they're old and they're in villages. They're not that old. Nothing is really that old in Thailand. They're maybe, the oldest one is maybe 100 years old. They were painted in the early 20th century. But they were not painted in big cities. They were in small villages by local people, and they're all very diverse. Has anybody been to the Northeast? Okay, so here's Thailand, and as you see, a lot of people go here, and then an awful lot of people go here. Beaches, right? You like those beaches. And then some people go up here, where it's nice and smoggy, and there are temples here. And then there's this whole Isan, which is the largest region and has the most people. And in the past, there were some cities that were Thaiized over on the borders, but we'll talk about the center of Isan. Now, this historically, this area was sort of a buffer zone between the kingdom of Siam, Bangkok, and the Lao kingdom up here, and so it was kind of there were no strict borders or jurisdictions that were set in place until the early 20th century. So the people here are Lao. They're very much like the Lao across the border. But there are more Lao here than there are in all of Laos. Now, what I've called the Isan heartland is right around here, and these are the temples we'll be talking about here. We won't talk about Nakhon Ratchasima or Korat. I don't consider that Isan. It's sort of the gateway to it, but it's a different culture. There are also beautiful murals right along these borders here. But they're all different. This group is the most alike. So let's go to Isan. You can fly, not to the villages, but to several big cities. And I always like to look out the plane and look down, and you see what you see everywhere in Southeast Asia, the meandering rivers and expanses of rice field and the villages clustered together. Now, one thing that's different about Isan, if you're looking out of an airplane and you don't know if you're over which central or the central region or the northeast, if you see trees like this in the middle of the fields, then it's Isan. People tend to leave some of their trees. And here we are on the way to a village. It's very tidy. The roads don't wind so much as they do in the north. They're straight roads. Very few hotels or resorts like you find in the north. It's mostly just local Isan people. And here they are. But I don't want to make too much of the fact that although their traditional work is rice farming, I would not call them peasants. They are very cosmopolitan. They've traveled. A quite large percentage have traveled at least in Bangkok and worked there. They have worked abroad in Asia, in Taiwan, sometimes Israel. So quite a lot of people have traveled more widely than some Bangkok people. And in the meantime, they farm to grow their own rice. They're very proud of growing their own rice. They don't want to buy rice. And so some of them have relatives who work in the cities, and when they come home, they will take rice back home with them, the real good rice. But they also work in many different ways. Teachers, drivers, clerical staff, beauticians, and performers. They make handicrafts. They make takeout food. They do a lot of other things besides work the farm. Now, we're going to be talking about temples, so let's look at a temple. And the temple buildings are, what you see here is called the Sim, or the Ordination Hall. There are other buildings as well. The Assembly Hall, where people gather, the reliquary, where the relics are kept, housing for the monks and novices, and a school building. In fact, the temples were the sites of schools. That's where people got their education. And what they read in the past were the old manuscripts made of palm leaf. And they read the story in the local language. And even in Isan, they read, there was a written language, which people are trying to revive for those who are interested. They read it in that language. And the old stories that they read and learned by are some of the ones that we'll see here. Yeah, so that tells you, it's kind of what I just told you. So the Sim, or the Ordination Hall, has to be a sacred place, and that means it's marked out by boundary stones in the corners, in the cardinal points, and the sub-cardinal points, and below. When it's built, these stones are put below, and then the markers are put above to mark out what is sacred space. Because it's used for ordinations and because it's relatively small, women are not allowed. Now, people tell me that's not anything about purity, but just that women don't get ordained. And I don't know. I can't get a really straight answer, but even for somebody who's, no longer childbearing, I was not able to. I used to be able to go into certain ones, but now they seem to be enforcing the policy of not being able to go in. So what do we see in this one? We see, what do you notice that you might not have seen in other temples? What's the first thing that you notice? The murals are outside, on the exterior. In most, and it's the only place in the country that has this, usually murals are painted in the interior. And here they are going around. This is the entry. On either side there are two windows. There's no back door. And then the story, and you'll see these columns. People seem to be always walking. And you may wonder, what's going on here? Why are there these layers of people? And who are these guys? Well, these are the Nagas, the sort of a sacred deity that protects Buddhism. And these are really quite different from the Nagas you see in Cambodia, but it's the same species. And I'm not sure who these people are. I've never heard a good explanation for that. Someone said, when a man ordains, he's called a Naga, because he's between being a human and being the Buddha, and so he's called a Naga. And I'm not sure what that is, but I have not heard anything other than that. So here you see the Nagas again, and you see how the story winds around. It may not start here and go that way. Every temple is different, and sometimes it's hard to know where it begins. These people seem to be winding around this way. And then if you go around, it keeps going. So there's another Naga. I think that this one is really cute. They are very folksy. And when I talk about folk art, it's not a put down. It's the art of the people, of the folk, and not the royal art. So I love these older indigenous things. Now the people, the figures here remind me of shadow puppets in that they're flat, they're not full, they're two-dimensional, and that like shadow puppets everywhere in Southeast Asia, they copy certain conventions. That is, the men are in profile, and the women, and if there are higher deities, sort of those of higher spiritual attainment, like women, are seen full face or three-quarters face. But the men are in profile, which gives them a more active feeling. And in fact, there is a shadow play in Northeast Thailand, which is not as well known as that in the South, but very, very active, in that the puppets are large, people stand at the screen, there are multiple puppeteers, women, men, and they, and Isan people, Northeast people, when they hear music, they start to dance. So as they do their puppets, they're dancing too. So it's a very, very lively kind of shadow play. Have you ever seen shadow play? Yeah. So here's a detail of what we just saw. Again, when you look at it, it may seem confusing. There's so much going on. It's not what you can think of when you look at a picture. You think a picture should be composed of certain elements. But just recall that it's movement. And these must all be male monkeys. Yeah. Now here, this is, you remember the musician you saw in the beginning, he's over here, this group. So they are part of this larger composition. And this is the Vasantra Jataka, which I'll say more about. The future Buddha who has given away everything and is banished into the jungle, into the forest. And there he gives away, and this evil Brahmin, he's avaricious, so he's the foil to Vasantra. He craves everything, he asks for everything, and Vasantra gives him everything. He has a wife he loves, and she wants servants, so he asks Vasantra to give him his children as servants. And then, but the deities take care of them, they don't suffer. The children are here, they're little, see the little ones? He carries them off. And then when their mother goes to look for them, these animals get in the way. They prevent her from finding them because the story has to go on. If she finds them and takes them back, then Vasantra can't attain Buddhahood. He has to attain this perfection of giving things away. And so he has to give them away. Even though sometimes people say, he's abandoning his kids. Now up here is the procession after, the children are ransomed back at the end, and there's a procession that leads back into the city. And then here are your dancing men and dancing women and more musicians. So it's a movement that seems to flow. I asked a Thai who studies this what he thought, why it moves this way. Is there some point to it, and is there some hidden meaning? And he said, no, it's just like jazz. He said it's just free flowing. He said the artists have heard the stories ever since they were children. They've heard them and heard them and heard them. So you put a brush in their hand and they paint. Now, do we have time? The building we know as SIM developed, it evolved, and the murals were only painted initially. They only began to be painted in the early 20th century. Before that, there were no wall spaces for them to be painted on because the ordination hall was a simple thing. People were very poor. They did not have a lot of material goods with which to build. So they had these open wall things, just a roof, a space to enter, and there was not enough, not even a weight-bearing wall. But then this revolution came around, kind of industrial revolution, where murals appeared because Vietnamese craftsmen who had been building the French colonial architecture in the area, in Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, had a technique of building solid walls. And so what you see here was then, and this is more of a half wall, when you don't have, and this is the same, this marker stone, which marks a sacred territory. This was sufficient to hold an ordination, just for a few people. But then, once the new technology was developed, buildings like this could be developed with strong walls all around, and with all the space, they could be filled with paintings. Now, the buildings vary somewhat. Some of them have a porch like this where you can walk around, and some are closer to the ground. This one is very hard to take pictures of because of the angle. Here's another one very nearby. Again, that movement around. So what's going on here is the Santra Jataka again. Let's see. Here are the children. And you might have to turn the corner to see what happens next and then come back. But anyway, the procession is on the top, and they're going back to the city. There's a detail where you see these paintings are full of really wonderful little compositions, little clusters of people arranged very artfully. So an older woman, and then the younger woman wearing their very modest clothing. And then this guy, there's always a little bit of flirting going on. I don't know if it's consensual or not, or if he's really, hassling her. We don't know that. These were painted by men, so I suppose, who knows? So now in the back panel, sometimes there are two stories going on one panel. Right here is the end of the Santra Jataka, where the avaricious Brahmin has died. He's died of gluttony. He ate so much his stomach burst open. And so he's having a funeral. And then up here is a new story, the story of the life of the Buddha. But the story of the life of the Buddha is not one of the most important stories found in these murals. And only certain incidents are depicted. Right here is where the prince, Siddhartha, is about to leave his family and his newborn baby and his concubines and go out to become an ascetic. So here's the ladies, Here he cuts off his top knot and then proceeds to meditate. Just the key incidents. He's tempted by Mara to not attain enlightenment. Here's Torani, the goddess, who pours out the water and sweeps away the demons that are tempting him. And then he does attain enlightenment. Yes. And then goes out and preaches for a long time. And then one day he eats some food that is spoiled and dies. And notice that it's a quite human depiction of his suffering. He's actually having a bad time, throwing up. His death is here. And I think there's a quite wonderful rendering of the grieving process, how his followers are crying. They're in disarray. Then they line up, and then here is the funeral pyre. Now, because these murals move around the building and can be so confusing, two people I know, two friends of mine, Leadham Lefferts, I don't know if you know Leadham Lefferts, and another person have taken pictures and attempted to trace out the movement. So they have this here, and then they have a color code. That you can follow if you want to take the time to see what happens. The royal family goes, Chuchok is the villain, Brahmin, Chuchok and the children, rescuers. So all that, I haven't tried it out, but it shows you how complex it is and how just that there is a way to figure out what is going on. And the question is, how do the artists do this? How do they plan this? Or was it just jazz? Did they just sort of think it up and put something in where they had a space? Now, the interiors of these temples are not as elaborate as the exteriors. The interiors were used for ordinations. They were very small. And what people say is that because the women could not go in, the exterior was made much more beautiful. There was a lot more to look at, a lot more going on than on the interior. Now here's another story, also Vasantra, and I want to point out something here that in these murals, unlike the royal ones, you see all kinds of levels of people everywhere. In the royal murals, you often see the ordinary people on the bottom, and they are referred to as the dregs. And then you see the upper crust people at the top, and the deities. Here, it's everything, because it's a movement, and it's what I call democracy. I once gave a talk saying, if you want to find democracy in Thailand, look at Isan murals, because that's where you'll see it. So you see these people, part of the procession. You see some incidents in the Sampradjataka, and then a lot of other things that I can't explain right now. So these are the stories. I mentioned the Sampradjataka. This is probably the most important story in Isan, much more important than the life of the Buddha, because this is where he has to make it. He has to once he's done these things, then he can be reborn as the Buddha, and that won't be very difficult compared to what he's had to do before in his life as Vasantra and in his other previous lives where he had to perfect certain types of values. So there's a set of jatakas that are known as canonical jatakas. There are about 500 of them. They were written in Pali, and they're known all around the Buddhist world. But there's also some Southeast Asian Jatakas that are only known in the Southeast Asian Buddhist countries. And these are stories, local stories, where the hero is said to be a bodhisattva, a future Buddha. One of these is Sinsai. Sinsai is a male, but the story is about, well, once upon a time there was a king, and he had a sister. And his sister, who he loved very much, was kidnapped by an ogre. But the ogre wasn't really so bad. The ogre loved her. It's just that he couldn't marry her because they were different, because he was an ogre. And if he asked to marry her, he'd be refused. So what could he do? He had to kidnap her, right? And he was very nice to her, and he kidnapped her. And her brother was distraught. His brother didn't know what to do for a long time. And his brother became a monk for a while. And then, as he was going on his alms rounds, he ran into 7 beautiful women. So he said, I can't be a monk anymore, look at that. And so he decided to ask their father, they were all sisters, if he could marry them. So he married them, and then he said, now we have to go find my sister. So he wanted them all to produce sons. And so they all, so 3 of the women produced sons that were, one had twins and the other produced another one. So there were these 3 magical boys. Sinsai, who was born holding a bow and arrow, pretty magical. Ouch. And then there was another one who's part shell, and we'll see them here, and another one who is part lion and part elephant. And they, because they're so weird, they're banned. They have to go out to the forest. And then the other women have other children, 7 other boys, and they live in the palace. But then one day they have to go out and find the princess, and they meet. And so, of course, the 7 guys who live in the palace are jealous of the others. And so there's this intrigue about how they try to kill, especially Sinsai. But in the end, everything turns out okay. At one story, they kill the ogre and the woman grieves, but then in another story, he comes back to life. And they live happily ever after. So it's a great adventure. Another one is the Lao version of the Rama epic, but it is in most contexts in Southeast Asia and in India, it's a Hindu story. Well, here it is a Buddhist story. The 2 brothers, Prahlad and Pralam, are twins, but Rama is also a bodhisattva. And they have a lot of adventures. The Rama part of it that we know of is only in part 2. So part 1 has a lot of other things happening. And so that is also depicted. Another thing is Pratmalai, the work I translated for my dissertation. It's about an arhat, a highly established enlightened monk who is able to go to the heavens and the hells. And then he brings back the story of the future of the world and how it will devolve and then evolve again, and then Maitreya will come. But if you want that, and then if you want to meet Maitreya, which is good, because you have sort of a back door to nirvana, then you should listen to the entire Vasantra Jataka. So that's why these 2 are connected. Other stories are the last 10 Jatakas and the life of the Buddha, but the life of the Buddha, only a few incidents, and not all of them. Now, a lot was going on after the murals were painted. They were painted between, let's say, 1915 or so up to about 1950. And then there was this period of Thaization, a long period, which began before that, where the government felt that everybody should be Thai. If you live in Thailand, you should speak Thai, dress Thai, do everything in Thailand, and that local customs, like local Buddhist practices, were not Thai. And so the schools that used to teach the reading in the old manuscripts began to use Thai textbooks. And in some schools, in fact, kids were fined a baht if they spoke a word of Lao. So they really had to speak Thai. And Thaization brought about modernization, and people began to lose interest in their old temples and murals. And they wanted to build new ones, such as those, which all look alike, built on Bangkok models. So this is an old one. And then this is it. So which one do you like better? The old one. Yeah, they were all different. Each one was distinct, and they had a wonderful balance. And these are all models put forth by the Department of Religious Affairs. And you can get blueprints and ways to build them, like Tinker Toys, to assemble them. And so people valued these because they were modern and Thai. But these two people, Pai wrote and we wrote, they were an artist and an architect who were both from the South, saw the value of these unique buildings and murals. And they would go to and this was in the 80s and 70s when it was really hard to get around on the roads on a motorbike. The roads now, the highways are fantastic. But they went all around, took surveys, and did these two books, pioneering books, to try to persuade abbots and people in general not to tear down their own buildings, because quite a few are gone. They put together these two books, and this one is just full of diagrams of incredible temples. Interestingly, this project was, this came at a time when people began to realize that the Thaization was not such a good idea and that diversity was better. So again, there have been a lot of trends. So at this time, cultural centers tended to be built in every province, and this project got support, especially from the president of Khon Kaen University, who was a Bangkok man. Now I wonder if Isan people had tried it, they were probably not too shy, too humble to propose something like this. So it took Southerners who are more blunt and outspoken and the Bangkok University president to get this project moving. So here is one sample. Here is another poor saddle one, and then this one in the background. And this just shows how small these buildings were. This is the one you just saw. Just enough for a few people to be ordained. A very sort of primitive, but in a good sense, Buddha image here, and then murals going around, much like the cloth scrolls. Now, Bangkok murals, how are they different? Well, this is a superimposing royal Wat temple with the Buddhist cosmology in the back and the Buddha here. This represents Mount Meru, and things like this became standardized. This was really built to promote an idea identifying the king with the Buddha and with stability for the kingdom. And each side wall would have the jatakas, the back wall would have something else. And so this model became copied in other places as well. As opposed to this one. This is Wat Chaisi. It has the Sinsai story. You can't go inside. So someone else took this picture. But this is the old style Lao Isan Buddha image. And then those colors are all light, no dark background, and the local interpretations of what's going on. And I'm not sure, it might be a continuation of the Sinsai story. Again, a Bangkok central mural, very dark background, high level people on the bottom, and then down here are the common people, who they call the dregs, and quite often they look quite comical. Okay. Gotta hurry. So the Wat you saw, Wat Chaisi, again, there's what's unique is that it has a lot of, on the exterior, a lot of like columns and subcolumns and colonnades and things that jut in and out. And the story goes all around these corners. It's here, it turns, it just keeps going. And the figures are rather rough. They look even rougher because they've been faded. The roof that was put on was not the right style, and it allowed for a lot of damage. But again, this is the one where they are the best preserved and the most used. People are very proud of these murals, and I think the story here is very difficult to follow. How much time do we have? Running out of time. But a really interesting art, in terms of architecture, the arches here, the paintings, which are really very, very wild and very creative, full of energy. Okay, so what's the inspiration from these murals? Well, obviously it seems like it would be scrolls. Scrolls, here's a picture of a scroll wrapped around a building. This was in Laos, taken by a friend of mine. Here is the kind of scroll used in Vasanta Jataka festivals, very long. And someone has talked about either static scrolls, murals as static scrolls, or scrolls as moving murals, because there is this correspondence between them. So in these Vasanta Jataka festivals, the scroll is carried from a place in the forest to the temple and then hung up here. This is a modern one. And the people listen to the entire Vasanta Jataka story. Am I running out of time? Yes. Okay. So the end of the golden age. Again, here is an old scroll showing how it looks in many ways like the older murals. So what happened? Okay, these came along. These are this is what's being painted now. Each story is enclosed in a frame. They are full-bodied, three-dimensional, and there's a name down here. It identifies the story and often the donor. And these are influenced by a printing company in Bangkok. Again, this was the part of the movement to promote Thainess, so that everyone would feel the same Thainess. They could see a story and know what it was and feel that they shared. It was like the McDonaldization or the 7-Elevenization of murals. Here's one where I actually saw them being painted. You could choose your one and bid on it, pay for it, and that would be hung up here. And the difference. Okay, here's a new one. This is Vasanta, the Jataka, where Chuchok, his belly bursts open because he's eaten so much. And these are the modern people who have gone to the local Tesco Lotus to buy watermelon and chicken and bread and so forth. And they are trying to tend him as he's dying. Whereas, the old one, here he is, and in here they just say, and then the Brahmin, his tonk dag, his stomach burst open, and all this stuff came out, and he died that way. So this was much more fun. So a quick 50s murals painted in the various regions, then the research, and then something good happens again. The expansion of the Faculty of Fine Arts at KKU to provide degrees in MA and PhD studies of local culture. So that has led to a lot of good things in terms of preserving murals. Here's a Sinsai story, and Sinsai became a big deal right about the same time when the mayor of Khon Kaen, who is a Sino-Thai, not even Lao, decided his city needed a symbol, needed something so it would stand out from other cities. So he chose these, erected all these lampposts of the three characters all around town, and some people still don't know that this character here is not the same as the dinosaur, because the dinosaur is a big symbol in Khon Kaen too. But I think Sinsai is winning out. So recent developments. The city, there's been the professors and some people in the community and the abbots and the villagers have created the Sinsai model for teachers, for students. And they learn about what the stories are all about. They can tell the stories. And they have a lot of festivities. Like here, every year there's this big ceremony of cooking sticky rice overnight, which is like kind of like having a big cookout like under the light of the full moon. And then in the morning you present the food to the monks. And then at this festival, the students make these Vasantra scrolls. Art students paint them looking at the temple, getting ideas from the temple figures, and then they paint these huge scrolls, and then they give each one to a different village temple. They're also creating another form of entertainment. It's a stick puppet, and they are all made of baskets, different types of local basketry and then local cloth, and they act out the Sinsai story. And the kids have a chance to do this too. So this is what the kids have done, made the same kind of puppets with the guidance of the teacher, and then these decorative things with the characters of the story. And then here's a boy who can tell you all about the hell scenes and what not to do. He's ready to be an adult. Now here, this, okay, how do you want? There is music to this, but we're running out of time. Kids are learning to do shadow play, and they have a lot of fun. Their teacher really encourages them. They laugh a lot. They act out the characters. And so they get to make their puppets and act it out, sing the songs, do the voices. In the same way, these kids, with their puppets, have made the puppet show with a lot of action. They tell the Sinsai story and perform at the Wat. Then one final thing is that in another community where there are these three wonderful temples, the people, together with some professors again and some local government officials, have founded this Center for the Preservation of Murals and Local Wisdom. Local wisdom is any old thing that people used to do that they want to preserve. You know, it could be making jam, it could be making a certain type of rice, it could be weaving, it could be weaving this thing, making baskets. So they're trying to integrate the two, and also they have studied these murals to identify what is going on here, and so they draw a caption box. It's quite impressive, so that people will be able to interpret the murals. There are 3 temples involved, and that was at the opening. It's funny, they have this poster. Everybody has a job. There's the president, the vice president, 2 vice presidents, 2 secretaries, and then a lot of other people. But at least you see a lot of participation. And this has become the symbol. Now, some of my favorite things to end with, just there are a lot of cute scenes here, or things that you won't see in other temples. Some animal shots. This one I liked when the government at one point said you cannot ride, people can no longer ride in the back of pickup trucks because it's too dangerous. And that's how people get around. So this is like a statement about the pickup trucks in my own posting on Facebook. Again, lovely compositions here. At every watch you can find just wonderful little details. Animals. Cats. And then here's one of my favorites. This is just what you think it is. These women are mooning somebody. They are the wife of Chuchok, the wife of the Brahmin. wants to have servants. They laugh at her because she's so new to them, and they give her a hard time. So they actually do lift up their pasins and they moon her, front and back. And you will probably see this only in the Northeast, but not in the newer ones. In other parts of the country, they may be pinching her, but here they give her the full thing. And with that, I will end it, I guess.
I apologize for the time pressures we're under. It's really ideal, but it has to do with the building space. We have time for one question or two quick questions, and then I'm sure Bonnie would be happy to speak with you individually outside as they start to reset the classroom. Do you have a question? Oh.
Yes.
Just one quick question. Thank you.
It's being recorded.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the talk. Can you speak a little bit more about the relationships between the scrolls and the wall murals? Because you began by kind of suggesting that there was a close relationship, but actually, if you think of how the scrolls are laid out and the logics of the scrolls and the walls, they seem to be many variations. And so it seems that there was perhaps kind of a looser relationship than just the scrolls serving as a source of inspiration.
Yeah, the scrolls have changed too. The scenes are in boxes, just like the new paintings. And they're sort of mass produced now. They're not produced individually as they were before. And I don't mean to suggest that they were literally, that the murals evolved from a literal thing, but it reminds me of that. Mm-hmm. And that there is this horizontality that you see in Isan. The landscape is horizontal. You know, you can just look far. It's rice fields. You don't see a lot of mountains. There's the other thing that Isan people are always on the go. They're moving. They will work anywhere in the world to make money. The other thing is processions. All these stories have processions, so there's always this movement in, having either someone's banned to the forest and they come back, that's this big theme, or some celebration, and they love to have that in the scroll. These scrolls are very participatory in that the people themselves are part of them. And in a lot of them, they're at the same level as the Buddha, not because they don't respect him, but because it's part of their lives.
Thank you.
Does that answer it?
Sure.
Judith.
Judith, hold on 1 second. Nobody can hear.
What about the music that accompanied these events? Do they?
So I could find it. I can play it for you later. It's can, drums, thing, everything, the whole stick. A lot of very lively music. The processions are very, very active, and people dance in them. You know, you don't think of people dancing on their way to church, but they do dance on their way to the Wat. And even in other parts of the country, in the north, it'll be a big gift-giving thing, and they all dress up to be as beautiful as possible. And they have these beautiful gifts, and they present it in a beautiful way. But they may also drink some beer along the way, or some whiskey, because they're happy. They know that all of these things will lead to something better. And they're confident. People do believe that there will be another life, and that they probably won't attain nirvana for a long, 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 long time. But they could possibly, but at least things will be better. And so there's this joy in knowing they've done that. In Chiang Mai right now, there are a lot of Thai Gai people, Shan people, and they are great makers of merit. They participate very strictly in everything. And once a year, there's a walk up Doi Siteb, the sacred mountain, 11 kilometers. And these people hike their way up the mountain. They are the biggest walkers. They really want to make that merit. It's very important to them. So the most important thing, you might say, in Southeast Asian Buddhism is the making of merit so that you will have a better life. Anything else? I'd love to play the music, though. I can do it for you later. I don't know how to get out of this.
I just have one quick question, Bonnie.
Yes.
The original function, when they were on the outside of the temples, I know women could see, especially in the ordination one, is the original function to teach people a historical lesson, or is it to contemplate, to gather a sense of morality? What do you think the functions are?
To teach the story. Yeah. People didn't meditate until recently. Meditation now is a big thing, but it's only been a 20th century thing. Usually the monks meditated and no one else did, and not all the monks meditated. Now it's become a big thing for lay people. But to see the story and to have fun, that's why some of the scenes are amusing, to keep your interest, because who knows what you might find. You know, if you keep going, you might see the scene with the ladies, you know, their booty's showing, and if you just have to look hard enough. Or you might find a little love scene. So there was always something interesting to look for.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Thank you, Bonnie. That was very interesting. So I wanted to ask, you made a comment early on that women were depicted full face. And then you said something like women, like deities, maybe I misheard you, were sort of, women were considered in the same category as deities? No, what did you say?
Visually.
Visually they are, but not otherwise.
No, but I'm making this statement. It's interesting that women are in full face and so are deities. But yet no one considers women to be close to deities. You know, you have to.
Oh, I see.
To be,
Okay.
you can't be ordained if you're a woman.
Mhm.
And monks are more sacred than people, but that's the convention seen in Java too, right? Or not?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Oh.
But I think that it depends on the woman. I think that the high-class women are not full face.
Okay.
That's my impression. The Sumbathra.
But I think in Malaysia they are like the Thai.
Oh, okay, I'll have to
And
think about
the
that.
southern Thai are like this too. So do we actually have to pick up and leave?
The next class is very brutal. They just walk right in and they have to put arrange the room back to a classroom.
Oh.
Bonnie, you are a treasure trove of really interesting information, and I appreciate that you could be with
Oh,
us today.
thank you.